Welcome to the number one show and the source of truth for all things MedTech. Here, we reveal the secrets and stories behind the investments, science, and commercialization of the MedTech industry. Every week, we'll take you on a wild ride with the biggest names in the game, from entrepreneurs and investors who are shaking up the market to healthcare providers who are revolutionizing the way we think and practice medicine. So hold on tight and get ready for a journey like no other. This is the State of MedTech. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. And this is a good one for those of you who are in sales. And if you ever wondered why some people quickly climb the corporate ladder while others don't, it might seem like magic, but it's not, right? There's an actual framework. And so our guest today is Barrie, who is a medical sales leader. He's worked in places like Bioventus and Smith & Nephew. And more specifically, he was a Hall of Fame and President's Club winning sales rep and has been a top producing sales leader in like multiple industries. He wrote a book, a previous book called The Selling Edge: How to Reach the Top in Any Sales Industry. And as a baseball enthusiast and fitness junkie, very happily married with 3 children and lives in the greater Sacramento area, and decided to write this book that we're going to talk about. And more specifically, this episode is less about promoting the book and more about his framework in the book. And the book is called Promoted: The Proven Path to Career Advancement. And so in it, we're going to sort of deconstruct and answer a few things. Number one is like, how do you clarify why you want to pursue leadership roles? How do you frame the discussions with those above you to gain their support? The roadmap, and this is the most important part of the interview, the roadmap needed that you have to create in order to gain the skills and experiences needed to get promoted. And then how do you solidify an accountability plan to see it all through? So we go through all that and more. It's a great episode. And so definitely, if you're listening to this on the road, you're going to want to probably re-listen to this one again, because again, when we go through the roadmap, that's probably the most important part of the interview, because I think too many times, and I learned this the hard way in my medical sales career, is we think that if we just work really hard and deliver results, that somebody magically is going to say, hey, we should promote this person. It just doesn't happen that way. And again, that's why there's some people where you say, how the heck did that guy or gal get promoted, right? And others did not. Now, before we jump into the episode, of course, as always, we got some resources down in the show notes below. You can go and buy Bret's book on Amazon. And again, the title to that book is Promoted: The Proven Path to Career Advancement. It's specific to medical sales. I also have some resources for you as well. If you haven't listened to my latest medical sales webinar called Medical Sales at Scale, please take a moment to watch that webinar. The webinar on one side is sort of a filter to see who's a good fit for my elite program called the Medical Sales Network Effects Program. But that webinar is designed literally so you watch it and gain a lot of value that you can immediately take action on. And if you want to, get started with something, right, I always recommend to people like to just start with my little LinkedIn mini course. It's called the LinkedIn Mini Profile Upgrade. Within about a couple hours, you're able to learn some basics of persuasion, apply it to LinkedIn, and really upgrade your profile, not only for your career, but more specifically for selling, right? So that profile upgrade mini course is usually $297. And if you're listening to this podcast, lucky you get a huge discount. So you can go to upgrademylinkedin.com and use the code SALESPODCAST. So that's upgrademylinkedin.com, and you're going to have to put www.upgrademylinkedin.com, by the way. So the www is important. Use code SALESPODCAST, SALESPODCAST. You're going to get 67% off. Get the thing for only $98, right? And those of you who've been asking, if you didn't know already, the meme and medical sales inspiration page on TikTok and Instagram, All Hail Medical Sales, that is mine. If you're on Instagram, you'll know that I use the story section a lot. I answer a lot of questions in real time, so please go give that a follow. And of course, the last thing I want to make sure I touch on is that a lot of people have been asking about like one-on-one coaching and everything. I do offer that, but again, I'll be honest with you, it's really expensive because I only have a limited amount of time. I decided that for my main program, we have a coaching call that I was only allowing people in the main program access to. But if you purchase the LinkedIn profile upgrade mini course, there's an option to select to join the coaching calls, which are happening on a weekly basis. And you pay, I think it's either 20 or 30 bucks a month. It's pretty cheap for having access to me every single week. But anyways, that's there on the checkout if you're interested in that. I hope that helps. And then lastly, look, I wanted to give a big thank you to the medical sales community. I love the engagement. I love the feedback. And so if you are watching this on Spotify, you can comment on the podcast itself. Like there's a feature to do that. If you're, on YouTube, comment there, send me messages, reply back to the e-blast that you saw this thing coming from. I read it all, me personally. I don't assign my team to it. I literally do it. So give me the feedback and help me make this better. So with that being said, let's get into our episode with Bret Barrie. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. So I have with us a special guest. That's Bret Barrie, who is a sales leader in the industry, but also just published a fantastic book called Promoted: The Proven Path to Career Advancement. Bret, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Good, Omar. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, totally, man. Like, look, I do get a lot of requests sometimes to review books and everything, so I normally don't, but, there's not enough people from our industry publishing books like yours that kind of help others in terms of their career advancement or just to be better at what they do. But before we kind of dive into that, I know you have a really helpful framework to kind of give to the audience about how to get promoted. Maybe give us a little bit about your background, like how did you get started in this industry and, where are you today?
Yeah, so my time in the medical device industry started back in 2006. And prior to that, when I was a college student at University of the Pacific in Stockton, California, I had just quit playing baseball and was back home for the summer. And I knew that I needed to start getting some relevant work experience. And at that time, I actually got into selling Cutco kitchen knives, which is the opportunity that a lot of college students do. And so I got recruited in the summer of 2001, did that. And I was absolutely horrible at first. I think it took me my first 12 or 13 appointments to actually make a sale. Even my mom didn't buy from me the first time that I saw her. But the thing with that business in Cutco, a lot of college students and people in particular do really well with it. I saw that there was opportunity there. And so I really dug in and latched on to some of the people that were doing well in that industry at the time, and ultimately ended up becoming one of the best sales reps they had at that time. And after doing it for 5 years, I really wanted to take those skills and see how they would transfer into another industry. I looked around a lot of different things. I looked at insurance, looked at pharmaceutical sales, obviously ended up falling on the medical device industry, and got an opportunity with Smith & Nephew to have a territory in Northern California in their orthobiologics division back in 2006. And so really that's how I got into the industry way back then.
Nice. That's fantastic. And so, in your career path, like what did you learn about because getting promoted, I think a lot of people boil it down to just, if I just work really hard and then it'll just kind of naturally happen. It's just not how it works. I think there's a framework. It's just like with selling, like you can't just go and say, I'll just talk to the customer and see what their problem is and tell them our product and they'll buy it on their own. It's just not that simple. So yeah, what did you learn about the concept of promotion and what kind of motivated you to write the book?
Well, I think the big thing is what prompted me to write the book is I really wish that 12, 13 years ago, a book like this had existed, because that's where I was at that point in my career. And so in 2006, I got into the medical device industry, was able to transfer a lot of those selling skills that I learned in another business, and most of them transferred into the medical world very, very well. And so I had been a successful sales rep in med device for, I guess, 3-4 years at that point, had won a couple president's clubs, really was looking to take the next step in my career. And for me, that was sales leadership. I felt like if I could take what I had done in my territory and be able to duplicate that and help have a broader level of influence, I felt like I could help more people. And I also felt like I could contribute to companies at a lot higher level too, at scale. And really, I ran into a lot of trouble getting promoted. It wasn't as easy as you just said. It wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. And in 2009, that was when I experienced really the first challenges of my career, I guess the first career roadblock. And so, and I talk about it in the book, basically what I had to do is I had to interview for a couple positions, not get those roles, and then be humble enough to accept it and go to the senior leaders that were above me and really get their feedback in terms of what were the things that I was missing and what did I need to do to develop those skills and show them that I had the skills to where they'd be comfortable promoting me to the next level. And so in the book, that's what I do is I walk through and there's 10 different steps that I talk through in the book, but it's through my own process and my own challenges I had early on in my career that I was able to piece some of these things together.
Got it. Yeah, and I kind of want to quickly run through the chapters, which is essentially your 10 steps. So you have crush your current job, intentionally build your brand, build relationships with all, volunteer to lead, state your intent, build a roadmap, learn from outside resources, find a mentor, be adaptable, change, and then off self and on purpose. Of your 10 steps, like where do you feel that most people, I guess, fall short, or like they make the mistake of not doing? Like what's the most common mistake you see?
Yeah, I think there's three in particular. I would say the first one, and crush your current job. That's kind of I say that's the overarching prerequisite. So if there were four, that would be the first one. Where I think we've all seen situations where sometimes someone wants to interview for another promotion or another job, but if they're not meeting the basic expectations of their current role, it's problematic. And I don't think, your audience is really high level. And so I don't think we need to go into too much detail on that one. But I think the three in particular that I would caution people on and advise people on is one, intentionally build your brand. To me, that was one of the big missteps that I made early on in my career. I'd been a successful salesperson, was a really social guy, also was a party guy early in my career too. And I didn't realize until I went to interview for another job, the effect of, I was building my brand through all of these meetings, these happy hours, things like that. And I never really took any career limiting missteps. Like I've never had any issues with, legally or with a company or anything like that. But what I wasn't being cognizant of was the fact that, ask yourself the question, would the CEO of the company be comfortable handing me the keys to the company tomorrow? And, and not from a skill level perspective, because I think, that's obviously most people wouldn't be to that level. But from a character standpoint, from an outward appearance, how you present yourself, are you presenting yourself in the way that aligns with the next job or the next couple jobs that you would want to have in your career? And I think that's something that early on in my career, I didn't really think about that. I think it's easy when you're a successful salesperson, you get a lot of, you win a lot of awards. There's a lot of recognition you get. And absolutely, you should. I mean, it's a really hard job, and the people that succeed at the high levels, I think they deserve all of that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, how you present yourself is going to align with how you need to be in your next role, especially if it involves leading people and being able to show a level of empathy and a level of company support. So that'd be the first thing that I advise people is really make sure that you're intentionally building your brand in a way that is going to be viewed of as positive by those above you. I think the second thing that I would say is state your intent. So when I first interviewed for my first management role, the first thing that the hiring manager said to me is, well, Bret, that's awesome. I appreciate you putting your name in the hat. I had no clue you wanted to be a manager. And so big miss on my part, obviously, and had to learn from that. And so I think once you decide and clarify why you want to, either get a promotion or go into leadership, the next step is really, stating it to your manager. Your manager is your first step, but also networking above you to your boss's boss, maybe leaders in other functions or other business units within the company. I think that's so important because they need to know that you have an interest. And then if they do, and you're willing to volunteer to lead and do other things, they'll take an interest in you. Absolutely. And third thing is build and develop.
I would say, if anything, the other thing about, stating your intent, being intentional about is that, people have all kinds of things going on in their head and there's all kinds of priorities. Your career is never one of them. It's like scraping the very bottom of any priority list. And so being very intentional, being public about it, saying, hey, like, this is my intention. One is that it kind of brings it to front of mind consciousness. The other thing is that, like, the people in the right places will tell you exactly what you got to do to get promoted. Would you say, I feel like the thing that happened early in my career, and I would see it often with other people, is that there was bad things always happen with assumptions. And there's this assumption of like, okay, well, if I do this or that, I will get promoted. And then when they don't get promoted, they get really frustrated, they become this disgruntled employee. They're not doing well in their job. And then, when they try again, it's just like, why would we promote you? I feel like that's like a big one that you just hit on. I just wanted to kind of make sure it touched on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we've all seen examples of that, right? That exact situation unfold where someone does maybe interview for a position and they didn't take some of these steps, and then they don't get the job, and then they end up moping around, or they show up to meetings and then they overindulge or don't participate in meetings and just have a bad attitude. And I think that it's unfortunate when that happens, because that could really be avoided. It also really validates why you didn't get the promotion. If that's someone's true colors, it's not the way you want to portray yourself. And I agree with you. I think the third thing that I would say is building a development roadmap. That's the third piece. Once you get on the radar of the senior leaders above you and have conversations, it's more about having conversations proactively, right? Versus reactively. You want to proactively let them know what your intentions are, that this is the next role I'd like to have. I think for most people, if you're a sales rep, I think the next significant position most people would want to step into is probably that first level manager, whether it's region manager, district manager, director of sales, whatever they call it at your company. But there's a roadmap to getting there. And there are expectations to that role and expectations of what it looks like also to be successful in that role. And so that's the third thing, is once you have these conversations, you can really have a really open conversation with the senior leaders above you. Say, hey, here's what we look for when we want to hire these positions. Here are the things that are important, and here are the skills. And so then it's, how do we go about getting you the exposure and helping you build that skill, and then and providing you feedback along the way.
Absolutely. And something I think this concept around intention leads also to level, like having a certain level of awareness. So like one of the things you mentioned, I'm going to read directly from your book here, which is, you said, every sales meeting, networking event, happy hour, customer dinner, social function I attended, I was building my own personal brand. People were watching and taking note. I should have realized this was the case, but I didn't. And I want to kind of, touch on that, because some people, what they do is they get really shy. They're like, oh, I don't want to, for example, on LinkedIn, I want to post, I don't want to comment. And I think, again, like a really good heuristic that you shared is like, would the CEO be happy about this or not be happy? So like, if you're posting something on LinkedIn where it involves customer success, or you're engaging thoughtfully with a physician, like a surgeon posts a case and you're asking a question, all of it is positive. And if your CEO or manager reacts otherwise, my honest advice is just quit, go to another job. But I think the other thing I want to touch on is, because again, this happened to me. I wonder if the same case for you, which is that you get influenced by your peers or by your let's say boss, and you do something because you think it's okay. In reality, it's not. And I like a good example of this is that when I was younger, right? I think by the time I got to like high school or college, I was allowed to hang around with my father. And so my father's a surgeon, but he's also Iraqi, right? And there's a hierarchy of respect in our culture. And so when I was around him and his friends at the dinner table and they were telling jokes, I was like, oh, they're telling jokes. I could tell a joke like that. And I would, and my father would get really upset because like, that was very disrespectful. And my thing was like, well, but everybody else was. So I think like for a young rep, perfect example, and if you disagree, let me know. You go to a conference, right? You have a great time. You do a team dinner. Your boss, other people, they're like having drinks, having a good time. Like, oh, I can do that. It's okay. I could, like, oh, we're all cool. I could do that as well. Absolutely not. It's not an invitation for you to just, same thing. Like I think with dealing with a surgeon or let's say your boss, if somebody decides to use foul language, which I do, right? But I'm at a certain point in my career where I can do that. That's not an invitation for you to mimic that behavior. And I think you should always err on the side of caution. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. Completely. And I think the main differentiator there is looking at people that are a little more experienced in their career. Even if they are having drinks, even if they if they're using a swear word or something, they understand holistically the whole situation. Number one, they're probably, and if you watch them close, you probably watch some of these nuances. Like most of them, they're probably going to have 1 or 2 drinks. They're not probably having 5 or 6. Maybe there are some outliers that do, but most of them, they know their limit. And they've been to enough of these dinners where they know personally, everyone's alcohol tolerance is different. I mean, that's probably a perfect example. Some people could have 1 or 2 drinks and maybe they're not used to it. It completely changes, the way that they think and operate. Some people, if they've been doing it a long time, or maybe they do consume a lot, and maybe they can hold their liquor a little better and it doesn't affect them. So I think I agree in that instance in particular. If you're a new rep, especially, or if you're, if you are really trying to make a positive impact, I think it's totally fine to go have a drink, be holding a drink, but be very mindful in terms of, and be more on the conservative side.
Absolutely.
I think the language thing is another perfect example. Is I'm a fan of being very conservative until you truly know the people you're around, because as Jim Rohn used to say, you never know who's in the audience, and you always want to err on the side of being a little bit more conservative. He would call it the marketplace. Be conservative in the marketplace, because if you don't know the audience and you don't know the situation, you don't want to potentially offend someone who could be very important to you down the road, or could be, and so whether that's a customer or someone internally within your company, I agree with that completely. I would play it very conservative, and at least until you know the lay of the land and the who's who.
Yeah, I just feel like in every situation, it's like, okay, so like I love Jim Rohn. I also love Zig Ziglar. Zig Ziglar has a great quote. He's like, nobody ever said alcohol changed my life for the better. And so it's true. And I think especially as a young rep, like if you want to have a drink, go get a drink and just get soda water with like a lemon in it or something. That's what I would honestly do. And I just like, the more I look back on these times, and now I'm very cognizant of it. So there's a lot of young people. It's usually guys, by the way, who have like one too many drink, and they're not like flying off the rails, but like, their speech is a little bit slurred and everything. And I'm like, you know what? Those little things, they have an impression on people. And again, my thing is like, if you really want to get promoted, you want to make more money, you want to like rise up in this industry, everything you do needs to be aligned with that. Everything. So including me, like, there's a point, like I'm very active on social media, as people know, and I used to get in a lot of trouble in the past based on my posts. And I realized, I'm like, okay, I need to assume that whether it's Instagram or LinkedIn, anything that is public is open game. And at that point, I need to be aware that there's some things I'm going to post that I have to be willing to take a shot on, right? And it's going to hurt me, in terms of like your politically in your career, but you just have to be very cognizant of that. I think like the big theme of your book is just around awareness and intention. It feels like there's like intention for your development plan, which I'd love to get into, but yeah, that's one of the big themes about your book that I've got.
Yeah, I think that's the first thing where most people don't realize. And I think, once, if you haven't gotten into a leadership development program or something like that, they do 360s and all these different things where you can get this feedback, but most people don't get this type of feedback from their peers until they go to interview for a position or something. And then they may never get it. They may get something that's very vague, like, oh, well, we just, we feel like someone's a better fit, or we feel like they're more ready, which I got all of that early on. And for me, the whole intentionally building your brand, I came to that actually unintentionally. And it was no feedback professionally that I got. How I really found that out is, so back in, it was 2009, 2010, I was working with a physician, orthopedic surgeon in Stockton. We had just done like a post-op fitting with one of his patients, and he had been off for the summer or something. And so I hadn't seen him in a while. And so Dr. Robinson calls me in his office afterwards, says, "Hey, Bret, I want to talk to you for a quick minute." And so I go in and it's like, "Hey, Dr. Robinson, how you been?" He goes, "Oh, good, but I want to know, how are you doing? Are you okay?" And I was like, "No, I'm great. I've never been better. I'm healthy. I'm getting married in 6 months. Things are awesome. My wife to be, we just moved in together." And he goes, "Oh, that's it. You're getting married. You're not going out boozing 3 nights a week anymore." like you were before. And he's like, I wanted to check. And in reality, I had lost like 20 pounds in a matter of like 2 to 3 months. So in the time period since I had seen him last, I had lost like 20 pounds and I was actually really healthy. But he was worried that I was sick or had cancer or something. And so it didn't dawn on me. I was like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. And then about a year later, one of our sales reps that we worked with, who I ended up being his manager down the road, but he was one of my early mentors when I first got on with Smith and Nephew. We were at a science summit like a year later, and he says, man, you're different, Bret. Like you're doing good. I can tell you're different. And of course I go down the whole rabbit hole, like, oh yeah, I've stopped drinking so much. I'm healthier, lost a little weight. He said, no, that where you're really different is you act different. Like you care about people more. You also are like a little bit more responsible. Like you've always been cool and fun, but you just present yourself in a more respectful way now. And it's a good thing. Like you're growing up. And for me, it was unintentional. And that's why I put it in the book, is because I think that this is something that a lot of people don't get this type of feedback unless or if you do, it's the hard way, because either there's a career limiting mistake that you make or, something happens. But I think it's a piece that not very many people will give you this feedback that I think is super important to your career path.
And I'm glad like something I want to share. Like I tell people all the time, like as a salesperson, that was a big kind of like focus of my courses. I tell people, like, if you productize yourself as a salesperson, you can actually get more meetings that way, because even though nothing changes about your company or product, surgeons will respect him, or say, yeah, you know what, I'll take a meeting with this guy because I respect, or a gal, because I respect what they have. Right. And I think like when you post on LinkedIn, for example, people don't realize like you can productize yourself, where if you're highlighting great clinical cases, you're celebrating your customer success, you're educating people about, like, let's say things you're learning from your peers or leadership, you're kind of like, it's almost like a political campaign where somebody's like, why wouldn't we promote this person? Right. And that's, I think that's a really, really big part of it. It just, it baffles me where on one side, and this is usually reps, they're like, oh, Omar, I don't want to post anything on LinkedIn, my company, and everything yet. And I just went to AAS. I go to AAS. I see some of these same reps who I had this conversation with, just going nuts, drinking, partying, like just because the surgeons have a good time. I'm like, very, very reluctant to post on LinkedIn, but like totally okay going out and getting just hammered drunk, like that's okay. Just it's
hammered drunk's okay, but posting something positive that might actually help people, whether it's customers or your company, that's taboo, right?
Yeah. So let me ask you. There's two types. I mean, I have a lot of people who follow me, but I think that there's two types of people who probably are going to be really interested. They're going to sit down and take notes about this episode. One is associates trying to become full-time reps, and then full-time reps trying to become managers. Let's start with the associate. Like, what's your advice to an associate who just started out, because they're eager to get their own territory? What can they do to put themselves in a better position, if you had to narrow it down to a few things?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One, I think really, getting an understanding of how to navigate a hospital or a clinic, and just that to me, that's the first piece, right? Is just understanding, the basic components of navigating facilities. Obviously, the rep tracks and vendor made, all that stuff that we have to deal with. That's a component of it, but it's important because you don't want to get your company in trouble. And with the growth of just so many of these hospitals are now IDN, attached, that the implications could extend far beyond just the facility that you maybe get your hand slapped in. So that's, I think, the first thing. But I think from an associate rep, really I would try to learn as much as you can from the territory manager that you report to. Would also encourage associate reps to try to see if there's any accounts that your territory manager will let you manage on your own. And, once you get to a point where they're comfortable with that, because, and this was the case when I was in orthopedics, perfect example. I mean, you can only grow if you're a territory manager and you're expected to either cover cases or cover appointments in clinics or different things like that. You reach a point where you can only scale the business so much to where you are going to be servicing the account, and you can't carve out enough time to try to farm and try to hunt for new business. And so for me, when I had associate reps that reported to me, that was one thing I would always do is once they were with me for a certain period of time where I knew that they were good in front of physicians, they understood the selling messages and how to sell the products. I would give them some smaller opportunities, smaller accounts that, I wouldn't give them like the big whale accounts in my territory or anything like that.
Right.
But if there were outlying accounts that I either couldn't get to or hadn't been able to do anything with, I'd give them 5-10 accounts and say, hey, look, so outside of obviously help and service, the existing business, I want you to carve out a day a week or a half a day a week to try to go and see if you can get in front of these physicians, see if you can get lunches or meetings set. We'll use my budget for it. But I think, that gives them the opportunity to learn how to sell. And I think that's fundamentally one of the hardest things when you look at an associate rep trying to get promoted to a full line rep. How do you quantify if you could sell if you were the main person in the territory, right? We know, that if the territory succeeded with you as an associate rep and I'm a hiring manager, what I'm trying to determine is how much of this would have happened if you were on your own. If you were the main person going in, can you engage a physician and their staff? Can you get them to look at a technology or, whatever we're selling? And can you lead this? Or was it your full line rep that you came in and piggybacked off of? So I think if you can set yourself in situations where you get the full training that a full line rep would get clinically, and all that, and then also show that you can have an effect and quantify what that effect is, you will separate yourself and you'll answer a lot of the questions that a hiring manager is going to have.
Absolutely. Now, just real quick, like one thing that has always been sort of confusing for me in my career, well, it was confusing up to a point, right? I think, there's not a playbook. Well, there's a book now, I guess, on getting promoted, but it's true. It's just like, that's one of the things I've realized about our industry is like, there's so much tribal knowledge about things. Like I'll give you a great example. Product management. It's a very technical thing, right? You would imagine that there's either courses or something on it, like for medical devices, not really. And so when you get promoted to a position of product manager, you're kind of thrown out to just figure it out. It's the same thing for me. Like when I did some product management and marketing, it's just kind of like thrown out, right? So
you should write that book, Omar.
I should. I need to. I need to get around to doing that. But one of the things. So one of the things that I was going to ask you about is like when it comes to like a development plan. Like I've been told this. Like it's like, oh, you want to get promoted? Like write out the plan. Your 30, 60, 90, or like what are you going to do and everything. And it's always like just throwing stuff against the wall. And I just kind of gave up on that. But what does a development plan look like for you, for somebody who's trying to? Again, I think associate and rep, it's kind of obvious what to do, which is crush your current job, really make your customers happy, be a good team player, and like you could essentially move on to like a management position. But for somebody who's trying to, let's say, have a bigger step, which is to go from a manager level to a director level, right?
Yeah.
What is that plan? What should that plan look like?
So I think, and this is where I try to articulate it in the book. Your example is completely spot on. I think most of the time people, when they're trying to promote themselves for the next position up, the innate nature is to hypothesize what you think that looks like, right? Or what you think that person is looking for. And then you create a 30, 60, 90-day plan and it may not even align with what the senior leaders above you really need or want in that role. And so the approach that I take in the book, and this applies to any level. I mean, the specific example that I use in the book is, a roadmap of if you were to be a top producing individual contributor, how do you transition to management? But if you already are a manager and you want to transition to the next level of your career, I mean, this works all the way up the ladder. But essentially the roadmap is you need to meet with whoever the hiring manager is and network up the ladder ahead of time to understand first, what are the expectations of this next role? What are the skills and the habits? What are the differences in terms of those skills? And what additional skills or habits or knowledge do I need to be able to show that I have? And then once you kind of know those things, and I think you can also network with people that are already in the role to begin with, which, that can go both ways depending on the size of the company you're with. Some people could view that as a threat. And so that one I would say proceed a little cautiously with. But once you know that, then you can basically backwards engineer what your development plan needs to look like. And then you can ask your boss or your boss's boss, hey, so I need experience in these different things. So for a project manager, for instance, say it wasn't a salesperson to a manager, but if a project manager or product manager, then obviously, that's probably you're going to probably connect with the GM or the SVP, someone at that level. And you're going to need to understand, okay, well, what do I need to know in terms of marketing, in terms of, the overall opportunity? What do I need to know from an R&D standpoint? How does supply chain factor into this? How does the commercial sales team relate? And you're going to be able to create a roadmap to be able to get practice and exposure and all of that. The example I use in the book, going from a rep to manager, I think the three key things that are probably the most important in terms of transitioning to that level of leadership is, one, being able to hire the right people. Two, being able to create a team culture that's positive and upbeat, and a culture that you can build a team around. And, the third thing is coaching, being able to coach people and help people improve and develop along their journey. And so, I go through, it's that chapter is probably the most technical chapter of the whole book. It's thick, it's dense, it's very tactical.
Is it the find a mentor, or which chapter is it?
Build a development roadmap.
Oh, build development. Oh,
yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. And so I give the example in the book of a manager that used to report to me when I was a VP of sales in a prior role, and the exact roadmap that we put him through. And, so hiring the right people, I would have my team sit in on interviews. And we would do some basic HR training ahead of time just to make sure that people understood, hey, if you're going to ask a candidate, especially external candidates, certain questions, we need to make sure that they're prepped appropriately so that they don't get the company in trouble or ask a wrong question. But I think, to me, that's one of the big gaps that I think, someone moves into leadership, and now all of a sudden you're a manager and you have to hire and interview people. And so the average first-time manager hasn't really interviewed a lot. Right. And so now you're hiring, and you're hiring people that a lot of these people have been through a lot of first and second time interviews. So they've become professionals at that first interview, and they're better than the hiring manager.
Yeah. Everybody sounds like a superstar in those first interviews.
They're all going to crush it. Right. And so I think really understanding how to interview, and that's where I remember early on my first management job, it's like the VP of sales comes in to find that last chink in the armor before you move forward with somebody. And that's why, is because the VP of sales typically is the most experienced interviewer that you probably have on your sales force. And you want to make sure that you're going to hire the right people.
Yeah.
In terms of building a team, I would have my team members, people that wanted to be managers, they run team meetings, and learning how to run an upbeat, effective team meeting where there's a lot of two-way dialogue. And this is something you brought up early on, where I think there's a big dichotomy from a leadership standpoint on, we don't want people sitting around at happy hour just talking about negative aspects of the company and complaining and talking ill of senior leaders and all this. However, there are legit challenges. I mean, sales is hard, especially med device sales. And so
nothing's harder, man.
No, if I'm leading a team, any of the teams I've led, I want that two-way dialogue. Obviously, I'm going to convey the corporate vision to you of how we need to grow, why we think this strategy makes sense. But we also need feedback from people on the streets to know, hey, are these strategies actually having the effect that they need to? And if not, where are the challenges? And then who has worked through these challenges? And so being able to have constructive conversations and really draw best practices from people that are figuring it out and letting them talk through it. I think that's healthy dialogue to me in a team meeting. But that healthy dialogue can go south pretty quickly if you don't know how to control it right, especially if you're a first-time manager. And then I think, the coaching, the aspect of being able to provide someone feedback and engage someone in a feedback-oriented conversation where they're willing to give you feedback and they're also willing to listen to what you have to say and really, talk through next steps and how you support them. There is a true art to that the top leaders have that unless you get practice doing it, it's really hard to do, once you're in the role.
Yeah.
So.
And, what's interesting about sales, specifically medical sales, like, is that on one side, because of this issue with interviewing, you have people who, rather than actually do it, like focus on recruiting, interviewing, they end up interviewing and hiring their buddies, which they go through an interview process, but what they don't realize that they're biasing it by like saying, oh yeah, this guy's really good or this gal's really good. Like that's problem number one. And then the other side of it is, I wonder your take on this, is that I feel like a great analogy for sales leadership is very much like analogous to sports, which is like, you know, who was okay. Would you agree that Magic Johnson was a great basketball player?
100%.
I would
Absolutely.
like
There's no disputing that.
Yeah, top five of all time. You know
100%.
how long he lasted as the LA Lakers head coach? I think he was like 6 months.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of salespeople like that where they're really good at sales. They're very good, but the moment you put them in a leadership position, they're terrible. And I think like here's something very simple. It's like, if you want to be a leader, you want to be a VP and everything, show that you can do something like the basics really well. Perfect example. Can you run a streamlined meeting where somebody would sit in on it? Their first thought is like, wow, this is a really like, you know, valuable use of time. Because a lot of times when I sit on certain sales, I mean, just in my career in the past, I'd be sitting there even when I was like 26 years old, and I'd be thinking, are we going to get some work done here? Like, what is this? Like, is this happy hour? We're just going to complain about things and come up with excuses. Like, what, like, are there meeting notes? Is there like a structure to this? Or we're just going to go around the table and give up, you know, reporting the news, right? And
Yep.
Fortunately, I'll do like you know, I don't usually plug companies, but these guys are really good at what they do, and I like it. There's a company called Clarity, right? So essentially they have a software that goes on top of Salesforce to make Salesforce become what everybody thinks it should be, which is like actually a useful tool. But, you know, I talked to the guys at Clarity, and they say, you know, because some of them are out of med device, and they say, yeah, you know, the problem with med devices, a lot of it is just like reporting the news. Nobody's like actually going through like data-driven reports. And it's just like, hey, everything's good. And it's like 1 or 2 quarters go by. It's like, well, what? I thought everything's good, you know? So I think like just being good at that one thing is a big deal as a leader. If you can't run an effective meeting, I don't think you should be in management. That's just my opinion. I don't know how you feel about that.
No, I agree. And I think all of the examples you brought up, I mean, the Magic Johnson one, the anytime someone is a really, really high level individual contributor, I think the fundamental difference, whether it's interviewing people or running a team meeting, is you got to be that way. And top sales reps are the same way because of what you did to influence a situation. Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, if they want to take over a basketball game and want their team to win, they will carry the team on their back and will that team to win. And I think, you know, top salespeople are the same way. If you go out and you're really good at influencing customers and working hard, you can influence the number in your territory like no one else. I think where it changes in leadership is it becomes more than just about you. And, you know, interviewing is a perfect example. I think that the example of hire your buddy, I actually fell into this trap. My first 1 to 2 management jobs. We do. But here's why is it, you know, the person's good and you saw them perform in the role that you saw them perform in, right? But what you don't know how to take into account, and I think this is the true development as a leader, one of the pieces is, where is this person now at in their career? And how would what they did then transition here to what we need to do? And what is this person looking for? And is this a good fit for where they're at in their life right now, what they want in their career? You know, I think that's a thing that a lot of hiring managers, the conventional wisdom is, and the conventional thought is, you go into the interview and you're going to try to find, of your 5 or 6 top candidates, you're going to find the one that you think is the best for the company, right? Well, I think, you know, you're going to find 2 or 3 that probably, could they do the job? Absolutely. Yes. In most cases you could. But to me, I think the way I like to look at it is, of these people, who is this company in our situation here the best fit for? Like where they're at in their life, what they want in their career, what looks like long-term, because what you don't want is that person a year or 2 later, you know, they're looking for another job because it's just like the job that they just came from. And I think, and then, leading and team meeting, that's, I think the other thing that you look at someone like a Steve Kerr, who's done quite well as a basketball coach.
Yeah.
He wasn't their best player, but he was he was the point guard of the team, right? He was probably a B plus point guard, really good player, very good player. But his job was to distribute the ball and to really run the flow of the whole team. And he had to connect with everybody, right? And I think that's, to me, that's the next level of leadership, is really, even if you're a top producer, understanding, how do I connect with this person that's at 85 to 90% to their number? And can I really try to understand, how I connect with this person? Why do they sell? What are their challenges? What do they try to do to work through these challenges? And is there a way that I can help them build a development plan and support them to get them to that 100%, even if it's 95? It's, if you can move that middle up just another 10%, those are the sales leaders that are really, really good.
Yeah.
So I think your example is perfect, though. I mean, that's exactly what I think about, is people like Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson.
Yeah. And, I'll say this because it's young professionals. It's usually in their 20s where they just start out. If you're trying to move from an associate to a full rep, totally get it. You should try and do that as quickly as possible. Totally understand that. But 100%. People that
Absolutely.
They get in a role and it's like, after a year or two, they're like, okay, I'm ready for the next thing. And I'm like, are you? And I think, I was one of those people, and I think that a lot of people just have to be a lot more patient with their careers and methodical in terms of like really developing. Like, I'll give you an example. Is I was very impatient, right? Because our industry like really is terrible at marketing. That's a whole other conversation. But and I personally, I don't believe in this whole thing of like, you need X number of years of experience, because like I was able to do more like in Missouri in marketing in 1 year than most people did in their entire careers, right? Yeah. That being said, for the people who are impatient, my thing is like, okay, you should hyper focus and just not only take on as much responsibility, but just get an unbelievable amount of things done and deliver results at such an extreme level. It's you can't ignore it, right? That was my solution. But aside from that, I don't know, like I feel like there's too many young salespeople are just like really impatient, and they just want to like make as much money as quickly as possible. And like maybe maybe they could do that, but I just feel like they're losing out like short-term gains for long-term consequences,
Yeah. No, you bring up a good point. And I think, in hindsight, that's one of those things where I was frustrated and I think I felt a lot of those things that I write about in the book, of when I didn't get those first couple promotions. You feel like you've proven yourself. You feel like you deserve it. You feel like it's the logical next step. But I think that, what I would caution people to think about is, what if you do get that job? And what if you're truly not ready? What then?
Man, that's such a good point.
And that's in hindsight. And there was another podcast I was on, and that was literally the first thing they called out before we even hopped on and started recording was, the value of not getting a promotion because you're not ready is actually a good thing. And in my case, I will say it was, because when I did get promoted and got my first management opportunity, and I talk about it in the book, if people want to, read about it, they can. But when I did get my first opportunity, it was a very, very challenging time in our company where we were going through a lot of change. We had a new VP of sales had come in. They completely switched the comp plan, disrupted a bunch of territories. And so I had to lead through a lot of that. And I just think, had I been promoted 4 years before and had to go through all of that without the extra 4 years of training that I ended up getting, it was hard enough as it was. There is no way that would have gone well. And so, sometimes not getting an opportunity can truly be a blessing in disguise. And as hard as it is to get that feedback, I would encourage people, don't think about it like, oh, I deserve this opportunity. And you may feel that way, but I think really try to look at it from the shoes of the senior leader making the decision of who to put there, and think through, all right, well, let me get in their head. Why did they put this person there? Why did they feel they were ready? And then what do I need to do to take a step back and either build the skills or show them that I have it? So but I think it's not always a bad thing getting passed up for a job.
No. And then, there's I think, I don't know what chapter this is. It's towards the end. But like you had some things to consider that are not focused on the person with questions, which is like on the leader that you're dealing with, like what's on their agenda? What are they hoping to accomplish in the meeting? What do they really need? what's their perception of me and how am I relaying this information? What steps can I offer to take best to support their goals? I'll tell you, like, there's a book, actually, I have the companion version here on my desk, and I have the thicker one behind me called 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. And one of the laws that I used to violate all the time was law number one, which is never outshine the master. And so I think a lot of people, when they're trying to get promoted, they do these things that they think makes them look good, which does, but as a result makes their boss look bad. And I think my career changed the moment that I was able to put myself in my boss's position and think, what can I do to make my boss look really good to their boss? And at that time, it was usually, I was reporting to the VP or directly to the CEO. So it's like, how do they look good to the CEO and or board? And I think just when you sit at that level and start focusing on the team and the person you report to and not just on yourself, I feel like that's when you start getting the answers of like, oh, this is what I got, versus kind of like doing it in your head. Plus, like, from a sales standpoint, this is like an old, it's like old sales heuristic, but it just makes so much sense. It's like, sometimes you just have to ask, like, Bob, when I'm dealing with a surgeon, I would often just ask, like, hey, look, what do I got to do to get this technology into the hospital, right? They're going to give you an answer. They're going to tell you exactly what you got to do versus like trying to like do some fancy, question framework. And I think maybe sometimes with leadership, it's just like, hey, really want to get into this position. What do I got to do that? What are the steps? The other side of it, Bret, that I wonder what your thoughts are, is a lot of times you could be in this position, at least for me, I'm a startup guy, where you have the package, everything is there that makes sense. Like, you should be absolutely promoted. The problem is that the company can't do that because the moment they promote you, they don't have anybody to backfill you. And there's almost this thing where if you're too good at your job and you do too many things, you're almost at a risk if you get promoted. How do you like navigate something like that?
Yeah, and I think great point. And I think that is the responsibility that I would say you should put on yourself if you're trying to get promoted, regardless of what level. You should always be thinking through, who is going to backfill me? If I get promoted and this all shakes out how I want to, who would be an appropriate backfill? And then how do I help make sure that that person is developed and ready, and that they could make that a smooth transition if the time comes. Great point. I think that's something and that happens a lot of the time, where they promote, companies will promote a leader and they don't think through that next phase of, oh, well, who are we going to get to backfill that role and all of that. They don't have enough time to do it. And so then eventually there's a talent gap at somewhere along the organization. There becomes a talent gap, or they have to go externally to try to hire someone into that role. And obviously, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. There's a cultural fit, risk to that if someone from the outside comes in, and a way I think that to manage that. But I think that's something that I say is super important. You should always be thinking through that. If you want to get promoted from one level to the next, is who can take my role, and if I can help develop someone or have someone ready and I can highlight that makes me even more attractive.
It's a great point.
The person I'm hiring with, because that's an extra hire that it may actually fall into place.
It makes it, I think it's a really good point. And I think that a lot of our conversation today was very much focused on intention, very focused intention, but also awareness of the people that you're going to be dealing with. And then what are the events that are going to happen, like if and when that promotion ends up happening, I think that's a big, like, if you took your book, and again, there's 10 steps, and I'll leave a link for the listeners below. I highly recommend getting it. My listeners know, I read a lot of books, so I say that that I would recommend the book. No, they know they should get it. So be sure to get Bret's book. But I think a big theme that everything ties together, that ties the book together, is just having intention with what you're doing, having a plan, and then having extreme awareness of the perception and who you're dealing with, the perception of the company, these kind of things. And I think that that's why I liked your book and I wanted to have you on the show, which is, too often the advice in our industry is just just work hard to hit your number and everything else will follow. And it's just that's just not how it works. That's not how it ever works,
Yeah. 100%. That's a piece of it. That's a key piece, but there's a lot more that goes into it than that. And a lot more that people can do if they know the logical steps that they can take.
Absolutely. Well, Bret, just kind of in wrapping up, I got a few rapid fire questions for you, so you can take as long as you want to answer these. So first question to you is that, chapter of your book actually talks about like going to outside resources. Continuing education is a big thing for our customers, right? What's a book? Can't say your own. What's a book or a podcast that you've checked out recently that you've really enjoyed? You feel like you've recommended it a lot?
I would say, well, it depends on what topic you're into. But if it's on the leadership topic, I would say anything that Jocko Willink has written. Extreme Ownership, The Dichotomy of Leadership. He's got several other books. I think he does a really good job, and obviously, he has just an extreme amount of experience as a Navy SEAL leader, in probably some of the most difficult leadership situations someone would find themselves in. But he's got a very human way of taking leadership principles, but also teaching how to build in the flexibility that you need to have at certain times. And also really how to include your team in the plan, which, I think the perception people have of the military sometimes is it's a lot of barking orders, a lot of directing from the top down, and I'm sure there's certainly parts of that, but I think it's really enlightening to hear his examples, and I would say all of them translate into what we do in the corporate world.
Totally. So yeah, I do recommend his books. His books are really good. We were at Potrero Medical. Extreme Ownership was given to all of us in director and management roles, so we got to read it. Next question for you is, if there was a billboard, or I guess in the digital age, like a text notification that showed up on the cell phones of every medical sales rep in the country, right, for a year, every single day, what message would you put on there for them and why?
Learn how to sell your customer's problem.
Ooh, I that's a great one. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Well, I think what happens, and this is, it's human nature in sales in general, is you work for a company and you have a couple products, a couple widgets, or maybe a service or a platform or something, right? And I think it's most salespeople are going to go in and they're going to try to sell the widget. And they're going to go in, hey, we have this new knee implant system. We have this new wound dressing. We have this new, catheter for urology patients, whatever it is, whatever space you're in, you have products that you sell. And I think it's human nature to go in and want to sell the product, tell how great it is, show the clinical studies, maybe get into the health economics of it. But I think the really, really high level salespeople, and, and I do corporate account stuff now. So I think when you start talking at scale of like a whole health system, what you've got to do is really start with what's on my customer's agenda. Like, what are the overarching problems they're trying to solve? And let's start with that. And then if you can do that, flip that upside down and not lead with the product, but really lead with the problem that obviously your product is a solution for, you're going to engage customers in a lot better way. And you're also going to differentiate yourself, because most sales reps are going to go in and they're going to lead with the widget. And so I would say, don't do that. Start with the problem that they're trying to solve, that is already on their agenda, that they have meetings they're trying to fix, and you're going to align to that. You're going to have their attention. So
yeah, and if I can get like a little meta with you, I think that's also great advice for getting promoted, which is start with your manager's problem versus selling the widget of yourself, which is like, oh, I did all these great things, everything. Nobody really cares.
It's at every level, right? Whether it's internal customers or external customers, whoever you're trying to influence, they've got a job they're trying to do too. They're trying to solve problems. And if you can align to that, you're gonna be far more likely to engage them.
Totally. Well, Bret, this has been fantastic. So for those who are listening, please check the show notes below. Buy Bret's book. Be sure to follow him on LinkedIn. He has great content there. It's been another episode of the State of MedTech. I'm your host, Omar and Khateeb, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you for enjoying another epic episode of the State of MedTech. If you're feeling inspired and love this episode, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you never miss an episode. And be sure to give us 5 stars and write a short review, because that helps more people discover this amazing community of ours. If you're a company who has a executive that you'd like to be on the show, or perhaps you want to sponsor one of the episodes, shoot us an email at hello@khateebandco.com. Take care, and we'll see you next time.